At the waterfront restaurant, a tired black waitress watched the slick manager sneer at a homeless-looking guest. Instead of ignoring it, she stepped in, offering him a warm seat, a hot leftover meal, and quiet dignity. Her kindness earned her punishment: slashed hours, stolen tips, constant threats. But the twist came later. The man she protected wasn't broke at all. He was the hidden owner, and her small act sparked a reckoning that would change every life in the restaurant. Before diving into this story, tell us, what's the most unforgettable trip you've ever taken? Drop it in the comments. The Lighthouse Grill on a Thursday night ran like a storm you could set your watch to: glasses clinking, silverware hitting plates, chatter from office workers who acted like they owned the waterfront. Brent Lawson stood near the host stand, arms crossed, chin lifted just enough to look down on everyone from 5'10". He spotted a man push open the door, worn work jacket, boots splitting at the sole, hair flattened like he'd slept in his car, or maybe just wished he had somewhere to sleep. Brent stiffened like the guy was a bad smell that walked in on its own. "We don't serve trash here," he muttered, just loud enough for the hostess to hear, not loud enough that he could be held accountable. But he grinned anyway, the kind of grin people use when they think cruelty makes them clever. The man didn't flinch, he just sat at the bar, head down, fingers laced together like he was trying to hold himself steady. He asked Rebecca, the bartender, for water, no ice, if that's okay, and the cheapest side on the menu. Fries, small portion. Then he went quiet again, shoulders tight like he was bracing for someone else to shame him. Across the room, Naomi Carter caught the whole thing. She'd been balancing a tray of drinks and still managed to clock Brent's little performance. She'd seen it before, too many times, honestly. Wrong shoes, wrong clothes, wrong vibe. Brent treated those like violations of some imaginary brand manual only he cared about. And most nights nobody challenged him. They couldn't afford to. Naomi wasn't planning to get involved. Not because she didn't want to, she just didn't have the energy. Fifth double shift in a row. Her feet ached, her back kept reminding her she'd carried a sick 10-year-old through an ER waiting room 12 hours earlier. But something in the man's eyes snagged her attention. That hollow, tired glaze, she knew it, she'd worn it. When she finally approached him, she didn't use the fake pep most servers leaned on this late. She softened her voice instead, the way you do when you're not sure if someone's holding it together or barely hanging on. "Hey, what can I get you?" The man didn't meet her eyes. He sounded embarrassed, just ordering fries and water like it was some confession. Naomi looked at the kitchen window. The line cook was holding up a tray with 2 extra burgers, over-portioned again. Chef hated waste. Brent hated comps. Perfect conflict brewing. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Not a secret, just a kindness. Can I be straight with you? Kitchen overmade tonight. Happens when someone's new on grill. One of those burgers is getting tossed in 10 minutes. If you want it, I can make sure it lands in front of you instead of the trash." He blinked like she'd spoken another language, then he shook his head, still apologizing to the air. "I can't pay for that." Naomi shook her head back. "Not asking you to, it's already paid for. I'm just deciding whether to throw it out or offer it to someone who looks like they could use a real meal." For a second, he just stared at her. No blinking, just surprise cracking through exhaustion. Something in his throat caught, she saw it, and when he finally tried to thank her, the words came out broken, a whisper that didn't quite make it. He swallowed hard like he hoped the emotion would go down with it. Naomi gave him a soft smile. "I got you, I'll be right back." She walked away without dramatics, but Brent watched her like a hawk who saw someone touch food that wasn't theirs. He marched over to the POS terminal, where she was punching in the comp. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Brent hissed. Naomi didn't bother pretending she didn't know what he meant. "Kitchen waste, extra burger. That's a $22 entree, Naomi," he snapped. "We don't hand out charity, not here." She exhaled slowly. No eye roll, no attitude, just calm steel. It was going to be thrown out. Brent stepped closer. "Great. Then consider it coming out of your tips, and guess what? You're cut at 9 tonight. People who give away food don't need full shifts." He walked off before she could respond, because Brent liked ending scenes with himself as the final word. Naomi's jaw tightened, but she didn't push back. "Not tonight. Not when arguing could mean fewer hours, fewer tips, fewer insulin refills for her son. She just finished the order and headed to the kitchen. The man at the bar had heard all of it, every word. His fingers gripped the water glass so tightly the condensation slid down in uneven streaks. He forced himself to look like he hadn't heard a thing, like he wasn't sitting there eating kindness he couldn't repay. But whatever was in his chest wasn't settling. It pressed heavier, harder. Naomi returned 8 minutes later with a tray that looked like something meant for a VIP, not a man who tried to disappear into the corner. Burger with melted sharp cheddar, sweet potato fries stacked like a magazine photo, a small salad, and without explanation, a ramekin of chocolate mousse. "Long week needs something sweet," she said simply. He didn't speak, not because he didn't want to, because he couldn't. He nodded, eyes shining for a beat, before he blinked it away. Naomi walked off to serve another table, leaving him with his meal, and the growing realization that someone had just treated him like he mattered, even when doing so cost her. And he sat there thinking about how sometimes the smallest kindness hits the hardest, especially when you're the kind of person people normally overlook. That was the night the Lighthouse Grill felt like it might crack open for the first time. No big explosion. Just a moment, a quiet one. The kind that turns into something much bigger later. The kind that starts a chain reaction nobody sees coming. Ethan Caldwell had been in his office long after the last ferry left the Seattle waterfront, the kind of late where the whole floor went quiet and the only lights still on were his and the janitor's. He wasn't planning on staying. He'd been halfway through packing his laptop when his phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender showed up as unknown, no subject beyond 3 words. Check the tip pool. Ethan almost ignored it. Anonymous emails usually meant spam, but something about the bluntness made him open it anyway. The message was barely a sentence. "They're stealing from us." No explanation, no context, just that line and 3 attachments waiting underneath like landmines he hadn't stepped on yet. He clicked the first image, a photo of the weekly schedule board from the Lighthouse Grill. It looked normal, until he saw the red slashes through multiple names. Naomi Carter moved from a prime Saturday night to a dead Tuesday lunch. Jordan from bartending bumped into a breakfast prep shift he never even worked. Notes scribbled in handwriting Ethan recognized but wished he didn't. Brent's sharp, impatient lettering, the kind he used when he was fixing problems. Ethan frowned as he zoomed in closer. These weren't minor adjustments, these were financial hits for the exact people depending on those shifts the most. He clicked the second attachment and felt his stomach tighten. Screenshot of a bank deposit, Brent's name, Brent's account, Brent's deposit, random amounts, always under $1,000, $935, $770, $1,180. The kind of numbers that looked harmless until you noticed the dates lined up perfectly with the busiest nights at the restaurant. They didn't match payroll, they didn't match inventory. They didn't match anything, Ethan recognized. The more he stared, the more the heat in his chest built like something was waking up in him, something that didn't like being lied to. The third image was what did it. A credit card receipt from a party of 6, a big spender table. Tip line read $47 in one handwriting, under it, in a different pen, different slant. Somebody had rewritten pool total $14. Ethan felt a flash behind his ribs, not quite anger yet, but the moment right before anger starts sharpening itself. He'd seen receipts for 20 years, he knew when one had been touched. Someone at his own flagship location had literally rewritten the truth into a lie. He leaned back in his chair, letting the 3 images sit on the screen like a puzzle he already hated. He clicked out of the attachments and pulled up the staff records for Lighthouse Grill. The turnover number hit him first, 15 employees gone in 6 months. He scrolled through exit interviews, scheduling conflicts, family reasons, just moving on. Except 3 of them had small notes tacked on at the bottom. Employee declined to elaborate. Conversation ended early. Issue with management, unspecified. That was the corporate version of someone whispering help and no one listening. Ethan rubbed his face with both hands. His dad had opened the first lighthouse 28 years ago, a small harbor diner with a cracked sign and a big heart. Ethan had promised himself he'd honor that legacy. But somewhere between expansion meetings and investor calls, he had drifted just far enough that this kind of rot could grow without him noticing. It made his chest feel tight, like guilt and dread were tag-teaming him at the same time. He stood up and walked to the window overlooking Elliott Bay, staring at the reflection of his own office behind the glass. This place looked successful. Sleek furniture, perfect reports, smiling Yelp reviews, but now he saw how easy it was to polish the surface while something toxic seeped underneath. It hit him that someone inside his staff had been desperate enough to send him these photos anonymously. Someone had taken a risk, someone trusted that he might care if he only knew. He turned back to his desk, pulled up the POS dashboard, and ran the tip reports for the last 2 months. On paper, nothing seemed wrong. Credit card tips were logged correctly, sales were strong, everything looked healthy, too healthy. It reminded him of when you see a house from the street that looks perfect, but you know the foundation is cracked because the floors tilt inside. He checked Brent's file next. No red flags, strong numbers, good customer ratings. Labor costs impressively low. He'd even been praised for efficiency under pressure. Ethan stared at the screen, feeling the confusion twist into something heavier. He had approved Brent's promotion himself. He had signed off on the bonuses. He had let this man run the very location where Ethan expected integrity to be the strongest. That realization sat like a stone in his stomach. If this email was real, Ethan hadn't just missed something, he had enabled it. He looked back at the anonymous message again. They're stealing from us. Not me, not them, us. Someone inside Lighthouse Grill still believed they were part of us. Someone wanted Ethan to know, not to punish him, but because they believed he would fix it. That part hit deeper than the evidence. It made him feel something between shame and responsibility. He opened a new note on his phone, thumb hovering for a second before typing 3 words he didn't expect would come so easily. Go undercover, Friday. And as soon as the words left the screen, he felt the shift. The moment a person decides they're not running from a problem anymore, they're walking straight into it. Ethan Caldwell woke up Friday feeling like someone had stuck a battery in his chest, charged but uneasy. All day during calls with investors and contract reviews he barely read. The anonymous email kept replaying in his head like background static he couldn't shut off. By mid-afternoon, he stopped pretending he was focused. He walked into his bedroom closet and pulled out something he hadn't touched in years, his father's old work jacket. It still smelled faintly like sawdust and marine air, the kind of scent Ethan associated with simpler days, days when running a restaurant wasn't about numbers or optics but people. He slipped the jacket on. It was too big in the shoulders, too faded at the elbows, but it turned him into someone the staff would never recognize. Someone Brent would ignore. Someone who could sit at the bar and watch the truth walk right up to him. He shoved his leather wallet in a drawer and replaced it with a beat-up nylon one that barely closed. He left his Rolex on the nightstand, took out all but $20 in crumpled bills. He removed his wedding ring too. Every shiny detail had to go. Not because he was ashamed, but because privilege had a way of glowing even in dim lighting, and tonight he needed none of that. By 6 he parked 2 blocks away from the Lighthouse Grill, not in the private owner spot that always sat empty after 5 p.m., but next to a broken meter where no one would assume he belonged. The air was colder than he expected, slipping through the thin fabric of the old jacket like it was testing him. He pulled the zipper up and walked toward the restaurant, eyes down, posture smaller than usual. Already becoming the version of himself no employee had ever seen. Through the front windows, the restaurant was alive, Friday rush in full swing. Servers weaving through tables like traffic in a city with no lights, bar packed shoulder to shoulder. Brent pacing around with his clipboard like he ran the entire waterfront. Ethan took a breath, stepped inside, and instantly felt every pair of eyes skip over him the way people skip over donation jars they don't want to acknowledge. Maria, the hostess, greeted him automatically, then hesitated when she took in his appearance. Not rudely, just surprised. "Just you tonight?" she asked with a tone that tried to stay neutral. Ethan nodded, keeping his voice lower than usual. "Yeah, just me." She gave a polite smile and led him through the dining room, bypassing tables with good lighting and a view of the bay, steering him toward the bar. Ethan didn't blame her, he wasn't here for comfort. Rebecca, the bartender, returned to wiping glasses, barely glancing at him beyond the standard greeting. "Water, menu?" she asked. "I'll wait for the server," Ethan replied. He wanted Naomi, He wanted to see her work without knowing she was being watched. As he settled onto the bar stool, he spotted Brent near the kitchen pass. Brent looked right at him, stared for half a second, then dismissed him as unimportant. Ethan felt something cold settle beneath his ribs, not fear, more like recognition. This was exactly what the anonymous email wanted him to see. Naomi appeared from behind a row of customers, carrying 2 cocktails and wearing the kind of tired smile that stayed warm even when her shift had been too long. When she finally reached Ethan's seat, she didn't do the quick once-over most servers did to decide how much effort a guest was worth. She just greeted him softly, like he was any other human being. "Hey there, what can I get started for you?" Ethan kept the act simple. "Just water, and the cheapest thing you have." He felt ridiculous saying it, but Naomi didn't blink. She didn't judge, she didn't rush. Instead she stepped in closer, lowering her voice. "You had a long week?" she asked, and Ethan felt something unexpected, guilt. He nodded with just enough truth behind it, and just like the night before, Naomi offered him the extra burger destined for the trash, protecting his dignity with her phrasing. Ethan had prepared himself to observe, not react, but the sincerity in her voice hit him harder than he expected. She wasn't flirting, she wasn't pitying, she was doing exactly what hospitality was supposed to be, seeing someone who needed kindness and choosing to give it. He could already feel the emotion tightening in his chest, but then Brent's voice cut through the moment. Brent didn't shout, he didn't need to. His tone carried sharpness even at a whisper as he dragged Naomi aside. Ethan could hear every word from where he sat. Brent accused her of giving away a $22 entree, threatened to dock her tips, cut her shift, told her Lighthouse wasn't a soup kitchen. Ethan felt his throat go dry. He had expected to find something off, but hearing the punishment fall on a woman who had just shown a stranger kindness, it hit him like a punch. Naomi walked back out with the same steady face she'd worn through worse days, but Ethan saw through it. She was swallowing the unfairness like she'd done it 100 times. When she brought him the meal, extra fries, a side salad, and even a little dessert she must have grabbed quietly, he almost broke character. She said long week needs something sweet, with that gentle confidence, like she didn't need anyone's permission to be good. Ethan managed to whisper, "Thank you Naomi," and when she smiled and walked away, he knew something had shifted inside him. He wasn't here to just confirm a suspicion anymore. He was here because one woman who was being punished for doing the right thing had reminded him of the kind of owner he was supposed to be. For the next 2 hours, Ethan watched everything. How Naomi checked on tables with real care. How Brent hovered only to criticize, never to help. How the staff visibly tensed whenever Brent got close. How the older couple at table 6 left a smaller tip after being rushed out. How Naomi quietly handed off her tables after Brent cut her early, leaving detailed notes so the next server didn't get blindsided. And later, when the tip pool was counted in the back office, Ethan positioned himself just out of sight, catching enough of the scene to see Naomi's face when she opened her envelope and saw the insultingly small amount Brent claimed she earned. She didn't protest, she didn't make a scene, she just accepted it, like she'd learned long ago fighting wouldn't change a thing. But Ethan wasn't leaving the building thinking that. He left the restaurant into the cold night air with his jaw clenched and the $20 bill he planned to tip still in his pocket, because a crumpled bill wasn't the thing that needed fixing. What needed fixing was behind that door. What needed fixing was wearing a cheap jacket and sitting in his car replaying every word Brent had said to Naomi. Tonight, Ethan hadn't just seen corruption, he had seen character, and it came from the person the system treated the worst. That was the moment he decided Friday night wouldn't be the end of his investigation. It would be the beginning. By the time Saturday rolled in, Ethan moved like a man carrying something that wouldn't let go of his shoulders. He didn't shave, didn't make coffee, didn't even bother pretending that today would be normal. He just drove straight to his office while Seattle was still waking up, unlocked the door, and walked into the quiet like he was stepping into a confession booth. He didn't hesitate, just called it with a tone that normally only came out when the business was on fire. "I need the last 8 weeks of back-office footage from the Lighthouse Grill." His voice wasn't loud, but it was heavy in a way that made the director on the other end stop asking questions. When the files arrived, Ethan's heart hammered faster than he wanted to admit. He didn't even take off his jacket. He sat down, opened the first video, and pressed play. And instantly, something felt wrong. There was Brent, alone in the back office at nearly midnight on Halloween. He walked in fast, like he'd done this walk 1,000 times. Looked over both shoulders, closed the door, pulled out the metal tip jar. Ethan leaned in, eyes narrowing at the screen. Brent dumped the cash out, separating bills with practiced fingers. His back was angled toward the camera, but not enough to hide what mattered, because midway through the count, Brent shifted his weight, blocking part of the desk, and Ethan caught it anyway. A stack of bills disappearing into Brent's jacket pocket in one smooth motion. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't clumsy, it was routine. And that hit harder than anything. Ethan clicked into another night. November 3rd, the same dance. Brent checking the door. Brent counting. Brent pocketing cash with that same sharp, confident efficiency, like this was just part of the end-of-night checklist. Another night. Another sequence. Another theft. By the 10th clip, Ethan wasn't shocked anymore. He was angry. By clip 20, he felt it in his teeth. By clip 43, he had stopped blinking altogether. He paused one of the videos, hand tightening around his mouse. Brent's face froze mid-motion on the screen, calm, collected, completely unbothered by what he was doing. And Ethan realized this wasn't a slip-up. It wasn't desperation. This was someone who never expected to get caught. Someone who believed nobody was watching. And for weeks they hadn't been. But now, someone was. Ethan opened the restaurant's POS reports, cross-referenced the credit card tips, did the math for expected cash tips. The numbers didn't just drift apart, they exploded. Entire portions of the nightly totals were missing. Large chunks erased like they never existed. He clicked open the bank screenshots from the anonymous email. Suddenly they weren't confusing anymore, they were timestamps. Brent pocketing $935 one night, then depositing it the next morning. $890 stolen, $890 deposited. The pattern was perfect because Brent had never imagined anyone would stitch all these pieces together. Ethan ran a full-year audit. By the time he finished, the final number stared back like a headline you'd never want attached to your name. Over $31,000 stolen from staff. His chest tightened, not from the number but from the faces attached to it. Naomi, swallowing unfairness like she couldn't afford to argue. Rebecca, who always covered morning shifts even when she was sick. The dishwasher with 2 jobs and 3 kids. Servers who earned every dollar on their feet, only to have the best parts of their income stripped away before they ever got home. He suddenly remembered the manila envelope Naomi hid in her locker, the one labeled Micah's medical fund. Those handwritten notes she kept. Those quiet moments when she looked like she was holding the world together with nothing but stubborn will. All while Brent siphoned off money that should have helped her pay for insulin, doctor visits, everything she'd been barely managing alone. Ethan pressed both palms to his desk, staring down like the wood grain could steady him. He wasn't just angry at Brent, he was angry at himself, because he had trusted the wrong person for too long, and left the right people unprotected. He took a long breath, sharp and unsteady. Then he opened a new folder on his desktop, titled Lighthouse Internal Investigation. He dragged every video into it, every screenshot, every calculation, every note from every ex-employee who finally spoke when they heard who was asking. When he finished, he sat back in his chair, almost trembling, not from fear but from something colder and cleaner resolve. Last night, he'd gone undercover to see the truth. Today, the truth came crashing toward him all at once. Tomorrow would be the day he did something about it. Monday morning hit the Lighthouse Grill with a strange kind of tension, the kind that makes people talk quieter without knowing why. Nobody expected a meeting on a closed day, and certainly not one called directly by Ethan Caldwell. Staff trickled into the conference room, carrying half-finished coffees and a dozen quiet questions, though nobody dared say the loudest one out. Why today? Why now? Brent sat near the head of the table like he owned the place, tapping a pen against his clipboard in that impatient rhythm that usually made newer staff straighten their posture. He looked confident,
too confident, leaning back in his chair with a smirk like the meeting was about congratulating him on something only he believed he deserved. Naomi took a seat near the corner, trying to stay small. Her hands wouldn't stay still. She wasn't sure if she'd done something wrong or if she was just tired, but something inside her chest felt tight in a way she couldn't quite name. When Ethan walked in, the room fell silent so fast it almost felt rehearsed. He didn't come in with smiles or a casual greeting. He came in with purpose, shoulders set, eyes steady, not the polished owner from magazine articles, but a man who had seen something he couldn't unsee. He closed the door gently, but the sound felt final anyway. He didn't sit, didn't warm them up. He just looked around the table for a long second until his eyes landed on Naomi, softening briefly, before shifting toward Brent with a weight that made the air feel heavier. Then he said it. I was here Friday night. No build-up, no dramatics. Just the truth, landing in the middle of the table. Brent blinked, confused. Naomi froze. Ethan continued before anyone could speak. I came disguised. Old jacket, old boots. I didn't want anyone recognizing me. The realization rippled across the room slowly at first, then all at once. Naomi's eyes widened as the memory clicked. The quiet customer at the bar. The water, the fries, the burger she'd saved from the trash. Her breath caught, and she brought a hand to her mouth without meaning to. Ethan kept going, voice steady. Someone sent me an anonymous message saying wage theft was happening here. I didn't want reports. I didn't want filters. I wanted to see how this place runs when no one thinks I'm watching. Brent let out a forced laugh, trying to mask the panic beginning to spark in the back of his eyes. Sir, if someone complained, I assure you. But Ethan wasn't listening to deflections. He turned his laptop around and pressed play on a video file he had queued before even entering the room. The room leaned in instinctively. The footage showed the back office, timestamp in the corner. Brent entering. Brent checking the hallway. Brent pulling the tip jar onto the desk. Brent separating cash stacks like a magician who'd practiced the trick too many times. And then Brent slipping a portion of the bills into his jacket pocket, with the ease of someone who believed no one would ever question him. The air snapped, not loudly, but enough for everyone to feel it. Brent's face went blank, then red, then pale. Ethan didn't pause, he clicked to the next clip. A different night, a different pile of tips. The exact same theft, then another, and another. Every clip made Naomi's stomach twist tighter. Every clip made the staff exchange looks they didn't even know how to process. When Ethan finally stopped, he spoke quietly, which somehow made it hit harder. 43 nights, 8 weeks, and that's just what we have on camera. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. Then he set down a folder filled with printed spreadsheets. Over 18 months, more than $30,000 was stolen from my employees. And every time money went missing, Brent deposited the exact amount into his bank account the next morning. Brent shot to his feet like anger could erase evidence. Those numbers are wrong. Someone manipulated. She's making this up. He pointed at Naomi with a shaking hand like she was the villain in the room instead of the person who'd been carrying the heaviest burden silently. Naomi didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply reached into her bag and pulled out the manila envelope she had guarded for months. The one labeled Micah's medical fund. She opened it on the table, and dozens of little notes spilled out, receipts, scraps, handwritten logs of what she earned versus what she was given. Her voice wavered, but she forced it steady. I wrote everything down because I didn't think anyone would believe me otherwise. The room didn't just fall quiet, it softened. Something in the way she looked at those scraps, like they were the only proof she had of the truth, hit everyone at once. Ethan picked up one of the notes gently, as though it was more than paper. Your records match mine exactly, he said. Down to the dollar.
Brent tried to speak again, but the words got stuck in his throat. His confidence had evaporated. His arguments dropped one by one, useless against what everyone had just seen. When security stepped into the doorway, he understood. Ethan didn't need to raise his voice to make the moment absolute. Brent Lawson, your employment is terminated effective immediately. And if you return to Lighthouse property or contact any staff member, I will press felony charges. Brent looked around the room for support, for some flicker of sympathy, but he found nothing, only the cold recognition from people he'd taken advantage of for far too long. Security escorted him out. The door closed, and the entire room exhaled at once, the kind of exhale that comes from years of being pushed down and finally standing up again. Naomi sat back, hands trembling, tears filling her eyes, but this time they weren't from fear or humiliation, they were from the shock of feeling seen. Ethan looked at all of them, then at her. Now, he said quietly, we fix everything he broke. The moment Brent was gone, the conference room didn't feel like a workplace anymore. It felt like the air finally remembered how to move. For a few long seconds no one spoke. People just sat there absorbing what had happened. Shock, relief, disbelief layering over each other like waves crashing out of sync. Naomi wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, trying to steady her breathing, but everything inside her felt unmoored. She hadn't expected justice. She hadn't expected anyone to take her side, and definitely not the owner of the entire restaurant group. Ethan didn't sit. He stayed standing at the front of the room, hands braced on the table, eyes moving across every face like he needed each person to know this wasn't just about what he'd discovered, it was about what they'd lived through. What happened here, he said softly, is my responsibility. I trusted someone I shouldn't have, and you paid the price for it. The room stayed quiet but not empty. There was something growing there, a tension, hope, a kind of emotional electricity people get when they realize their lives might change in the next 5 minutes. Then Ethan reached down and lifted a stack of envelopes from his briefcase. Thick ones, heavy ones. Nobody blinked at first, they didn't understand what they were seeing. Then Ethan spoke again, voice smooth but edged with emotion. I audited every shift from the last year and a half. Every dollar Brent took from you is being returned, with interest. The room erupted, not loudly but in small gasps, stifled sobs, one hand flying to a chest, another covering a mouth. Rebecca leaned forward like she needed to be sure she heard correctly. Jason muttered a stunned "Oh my God." But Naomi, she froze completely. Her breath hitched before she could stop it, her fingers curling into her palms because she wasn't sure if this moment was real or something her mind had made up to cope. Ethan started calling names. One by one, he handed staff members their envelopes like he was giving back pieces of their dignity. People stared inside and immediately started crying, checks larger than their paychecks, compensation they never thought they'd see again. Then he turned to Naomi, and everything got very quiet. He held her envelope in both hands like it was something fragile. Naomi Carter, he said, voice gentler than before. You were the one he targeted the most. You're also the one who kept the clearest record. The money he took from you over the last 18 months, he swallowed, the words catching for the first time, is in here, plus interest, plus the cost of every hour he cut as retaliation. Naomi stood on shaky legs. She reached for the envelope like it might burn her. When she opened it and saw the check inside, her knees softened. Her hand flew to her mouth. She didn't make a sound at first, just a breath that broke halfway through, then another. Then the tears came fast, not delicate, not quiet, but the kind of tears people cry when a weight they've carried so long suddenly lifts without warning. She whispered, "This pays for Micah's insulin for a whole year," her voice cracked again. "And his specialist visits, and the monitor." She didn't finish, she didn't need to. Every person in the room knew exactly what that envelope meant to her. And Ethan wasn't done. He took a step closer, lowering his voice so it landed softly but clearly. Naomi, I've watched how you treat people, how you carry yourself, how you never stop doing the right thing even when it costs you. That's leadership, real leadership. She looked up, still crying, not understanding what he was building toward, until he placed a printed contract in front of her. I want you as assistant general manager, he said. Starting today. Naomi blinked, stunned. Me? Ethan nodded. You, higher salary, full benefits. Health coverage for your son. No deductibles on chronic care. You've earned this 100 times over, now I'm making it official. Her breath broke again. Not the painful kind this time. The overwhelmed kind. The kind people feel when the world finally tilts in the right direction. She covered her face with both hands as Emma and Rebecca reached over instinctively to hold her shoulders, steadying her through the wave of emotion. Ethan waited, giving her time. Not rushing, not filling the silence, because some moments deserve space to land the way they want to. When she finally lowered her hands, eyes red but steady, she whispered, "Yes, I'll do it. I'll do everything I can to make this place better." He smiled, not wide, but with a warmth that felt real. "I know you will." Around the table people clapped, not polite claps, not workplace claps, real ones, messy, loud, uneven, emotional. Claps that said finally. As the noise filled the room, Naomi looked around at faces she'd worked beside for years, faces tired, hopeful, grateful, and for the first time since she'd started at the Lighthouse Grill, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel small, she didn't feel like she was fighting alone. She felt valued, she felt safe, she felt like she belonged somewhere she hadn't realized she'd been waiting to belong. And as Ethan looked at her, now the new assistant GM of the restaurant she helped hold together, he knew one thing with absolute clarity. The Lighthouse Grill hadn't just removed its darkness, it had found its light again. The next few weeks inside the Lighthouse Grill didn't feel like a restaurant going through a transition. It felt like a place waking up. A place that had been half asleep under someone else's shadow and was finally breathing without flinching. Change didn't arrive slowly, it arrived in small, constant shocks that staff kept noticing in quiet, stunned ways. The first shock hit when the new POS update rolled out. No more back-office guesswork, no more mystery envelopes. Every server had their own login. Every shift ended with a clean digital breakdown of what they earned. For the first time in years, Rebecca at the bar checked her total and didn't squint suspiciously. She laughed. An actual laugh, and said, "Well, that's a first." The younger servers crowded around the screen like kids seeing fireworks, pointing, comparing numbers, shaking their heads because it finally matched what they actually earned. Then came the Sunday reconciliation reports. Ethan printed them himself at first, taping the sheets to the employee board where everyone could see a full list of collected tips and distributed payouts. Transparent. Simple, nothing missing. People stood around the board reading in silence like they were staring at something sacred. Because to them it was. But the real shift wasn't in the numbers, it was in the way people moved. The back kitchen didn't go quiet when management walked in anymore. The dishwashers didn't avoid eye contact. The servers didn't huddle together, whispering whenever shifts were posted. They walked taller, their voices sounded lighter. Even the laughter at the bar had a different tone. Like the whole place had finally stopped bracing for something. And every time a problem came up, there was a new phrase floating around, "Tell Naomi." It started small, someone needed new gloves for food prep, and Tommy pointed toward the front saying, "Ask Naomi, she'll get it done." Then came scheduling, then menu adjustments, then customer issues. The entire staff slowly shifted their instinct from fear to trust, and that trust pointed straight at her. Naomi didn't just adjust to her new role, she grew into it like she'd been waiting her whole life for a job that finally aligned with her heart. She walked the floor with calm authority, not the kind that demands respect, but the kind that earns it without trying. She started checking on the kitchen crew before every rush. She asked bussers how their classes were going. She pulled new servers aside and taught them the same thing she'd once told Ethan when she didn't know who he was. Everyone who walks through that door matters, so treat them like they do, and they listened. Even customers noticed. The atmosphere shifted from corporate polished to something warmer, more human. Guests lingered longer, smiled more, left bigger tips because the service didn't just feel efficient, it felt genuine, like people actually cared. Word spread fast around Seattle's waterfront. Not about the scandal, not about the firing, but about how the Lighthouse Grill felt different, like it had heart again. One night, during a dinner rush, Ethan stopped by unannounced, not to investigate this time, but to watch. He leaned against the bar quietly, blending in just enough, as Naomi coordinated the floor. She redirected a stressed server to take a breather, handed a fresh towel to a busser before he even asked, and sent a plate back to the kitchen before the customer noticed the garnish was wrong. It was seamless, it was instinctive, and it was hers. When she finally spotted Ethan, she smiled with a mixture of pride and disbelief, like she still couldn't wrap her mind around how much had changed in so little time. Ethan returned the smile, knowing full well that he could have replaced 1,000 managers and still never found someone who could repair the soul of a place the way she had. Later that evening, as the rush died down, Naomi slipped into the booth where her son Micah was finishing his homework. A juice box sat beside him, and his insulin monitor blinked steadily on his arm, covered now by insurance she no longer had to lose sleep over. His face lit up when he saw her, and she kissed the top of his head before sliding into the seat across from him. "You good baby?" she asked softly. Micah nodded, smiling. "Yeah, Mom, your restaurant is cool now." She laughed, wiping her cheek quickly so he wouldn't see the emotion breaking loose. Across the room, Ethan watched them for a moment, not intruding, just observing the simple picture of what fairness can fix and what compassion can build. He walked back toward the kitchen, greeting Diego the dishwasher with a handshake, thanking him for staying late. Diego blinked, startled, then smiled like he wasn't used to being acknowledged by someone that high on the ladder. Everything about the place felt different, and the staff knew the truth behind it. The restaurant didn't change because someone demanded it. It changed because someone cared enough to listen, and someone brave enough to speak up finally got the chance to be heard. Naomi stepped out of the booth a few minutes later, adjusting her manager badge before returning to the floor. She moved through the restaurant with the confidence of someone who had earned every inch of that title, not through authority, but through kindness. And you could feel it in the room. The lighthouse had found its light again, not from the sign outside, not from the menu, but from the people who finally felt safe enough to shine. 6 months after the day everything changed, the Lighthouse Grill didn't just look different, it felt different the second anyone walked through the door. The air wasn't heavy anymore, the atmosphere wasn't tense. The place had a kind of warmth that wasn't manufactured or trained, it was lived in. Earned, built shift by people who finally felt like the ground under their feet wasn't going to disappear without warning. Ethan stopped by more often now, not as a watchdog or a shadow, but as someone who wanted to be part of the place again. He didn't show up to check numbers. He showed up to listen to the hum of conversation, to Naomi's voice floating between tables giving guidance, to the staff laughing in the back, like they weren't afraid someone would yell for quiet. It was the closest the restaurant had felt to his father's original diner. Maybe even closer. Around late afternoon one Friday, the documentary team arrived, the one investigating wage theft across the country. They'd heard about the scandal, but what caught their attention wasn't the wrongdoing, it was how the place rebuilt itself after everything fell apart. Ethan didn't love cameras, but he agreed because he knew most people didn't understand how common wage theft was, and how many workers suffered in silence because they didn't think anyone would believe them. He sat at the same bar seat he'd once taken in disguise, the old jacket folded next to him like a relic from a life that belonged to someone else. Lights pointed at him. The space was quiet except for the low hum of dinner prep starting in the kitchen. When the interviewer asked, "What would you say to people going through what your staff went through?" Ethan didn't deliver a rehearsed line, he didn't try to sound wise, he just breathed out slowly and said, "Document everything. Even if it's on a napkin. Even if it feels small." Another pause. "And don't assume you're alone. You're not, you're never the only one this is happening to." He turned slightly toward the lens, "And if you run a business, remember that the people making the place run aren't numbers. Protect them like the place depends on it, because it does." As he spoke, Naomi passed behind him carrying plates to a table near the window. She caught his eye and offered a supportive smile, the kind that said she didn't need the spotlight, she just needed the place to stay honest. She moved like a person who had stepped into her purpose and didn't plan on stepping back. A little later, Micah finished his homework in his usual booth. His insulin monitor beeped softly, and Naomi helped him check it without a hint of the quiet panic she used to hide. Insurance covered everything now. She didn't have to choose between food and medicine anymore. She didn't have to ration his supplies or hope the clinic had samples. She could breathe for the first time in years. Real breaths, and it showed in her work. Her voice, her confidence, even her laugh, it rang clearer, brighter. As the evening rush picked up, a woman walked into the restaurant wearing paint-stained jeans and a hoodie that looked 2 sizes too large. Her hair was messy, she looked exhausted in a way that felt too familiar, like she was carrying something heavy nobody else could see.
The new hostess started to seat her near the kitchen door, the default table for anyone who didn't look like a prime guest. But before she could, Naomi stepped in with the kind of gentle authority she'd mastered. "Actually, table 9 just opened," she said, guiding the woman toward a spot with natural light and a view of the water. "You'll be more comfortable here." The woman blinked, surprised by the kindness. "Thank you," she said, voice small. Naomi smiled warmly. "Everybody deserves a good seat." Ethan watched from across the room. The moment hit him hard, not because it was dramatic, but because it was simple, easy, natural. Exactly what Naomi had done for him before she ever knew his name. Exactly what Brent had punished her for. Exactly what had started the hardest and most important series of decisions he'd ever had to make. Now she was doing it again, but this time, instead of getting reprimanded, she was the one leading the standard. A little later, Ethan approached her near the pass. "You've changed this place," he said quietly, with more pride than he knew how to hide. Naomi shook her head lightly. "No, you gave us the chance to," but he smiled, knowing she meant it humbly but not accurately. Because she had changed it, because she'd lit it from the inside. Because she'd turned Lighthouse into exactly what the name promised, a place that helped people find their way back to something better. And as the camera crew packed up, as tables filled, as Micah giggled at a joke from Diego the dishwasher, and as Naomi walked the floor with the calm, steady grace of someone who'd stepped into the future she fought for, one truth sat at the center of everything. Justice had started the healing. But kindness, the kind Naomi lived without asking for anything back, was what carried it farther. That was the happiness the restaurant held now. Not loud, not flashy, just steady, and finally safe. 6 months had already passed since the day everything changed inside the Lighthouse Grill, but somehow the place still carried a pulse. You could feel the moment you walked into it, a kind of quiet electricity, the kind that reminded people of what had happened, and promised them nothing like that would ever be allowed again. And even though life had settled into a new rhythm, the echoes of the past still lived in small corners of the restaurant, tucked into habits the staff hadn't completely unlearned, and moments of pause that came right before trust. Not the painful kind of echoes, though, the kind that made people appreciate every day that didn't hurt. Some afternoons, when the rush wasn't overwhelming, Ethan would stand near the back hallway just watching the staff move. He didn't watch with suspicion, he watched with the gratitude of someone who understood exactly how close everything had come to falling apart. And he watched because he had decided he would never let himself drift that far away from his people again. On one particular afternoon, the restaurant was halfway quiet, the lull between lunch and dinner. Naomi was in the office reviewing staff schedules, sipping lukewarm coffee with the focus of someone determined to fix every broken system she inherited. It was strange, 6 months ago she wouldn't have been allowed within 3 feet of the scheduling chart, and now her handwriting was on every single line of it. People trusted her. She still wasn't used to that feeling, but she cherished it anyway. A soft knock at the door made her look up. Emma stood there, biting her lip in a way that said she was either scared, excited, or both. Naomi sat up straighter. "Everything okay?" Emma nodded, then shook her head. Then nodded again. Kind of. I need your advice." Naomi gestured her in. Emma entered slowly, closing the door behind her, twisting her apron between nervous fingers. Naomi gave her the same patient attention she used to give customers who were afraid to complain. "Talk to me." Emma looked down at her hands. I want to ask for a promotion." She said it fast, like if she didn't get the words out in one breath, they'd dissolve before making it to the air. Naomi felt something warm pour through her chest. Pride, maybe, or just recognition. She had once been sitting on the other side of this same fear. "Okay, and why are you nervous?" Emma gave a shaky laugh. "You know why, because the last time I asked Brent for anything, I got my hours cut." Naomi sighed softly. "We're not doing that anymore." "You know that." "I know," Emma said, "but knowing something and feeling it aren't the same." That made Naomi's chest pull in a way she hadn't expected, because she understood that better than most. Fear, once learned, didn't leave easily. It hid in muscle memory, in reflexes, in tiny pauses before speaking truth. Naomi stood and placed a hand gently on Emma's shoulder. You've been training the new servers for months, you've picked up shifts without complaining. You handle the floor better than half the managers I've worked with, and if you want that promotion, I will back you. Emma's eyes shone a little. Really, absolutely. The way Emma's face broke into a relieved smile, Naomi wanted to hold on to that. Someone believing in her had changed her life, now she got to pass that gift on. Naomi walked Emma straight to Ethan's office. The moment she knocked, he waved them, eyebrows raised, when Emma made her request. With a lot of stumbling, apologizing, and rapid blinking, Ethan listened intently. Then he gave her a smile that reminded Naomi of the way a father might look at a child who just took their first brave step. Emma, he said gently, I've been waiting for you to ask. Emma blinked. You what? I've watched the way you work, the way you guide new servers. The way the team looks to you before they look to anyone else. Consider your request approved. We'll get the paperwork done this week. The relief that burst from Emma made Naomi's throat tighten. The younger woman looked between the two of them like she had stumbled into a version of reality she didn't think existed. When she left the office practically glowing, Naomi sank into the chair across from Ethan, exhaling a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She deserves it, she said. She does, Ethan agreed. You know, the best changes in this place didn't come from anything I did, they came from the people who stayed. Naomi smiled slowly. You gave us the chance to, and you ran with it, Ethan replied. She didn't reply, but the look she gave him said enough. Dinner rush hit earlier than expected that day. A ferry had been rerouted, leaving dozens of passengers hungry and nowhere to go but the lighthouse. The dining room filled quickly, and the staff moved in a coordinated rhythm that would have made old-school restaurateurs cry tears of pride. Naomi jumped in where needed, running drinks, bussing tables, grabbing bowls from the dishwasher, even plating salads when the line needed a third pair of hands. This used to be survival mode, now it was leadership. Ethan slipped to the back to deliver waters to the kitchen crew, a gesture that would have shocked half his investors. Tommy the chef shook his head with a laugh. You're gonna spoil us, boss. Good, Ethan replied. You deserve it. By 8 o'clock the restaurant was a controlled storm. Naomi moved table to table, eyes scanning with expert precision. She spotted a couple celebrating an anniversary and comped a dessert without hesitation. She noticed a man dining alone and asked if he needed an extra napkin for his spicy entree. She knelt down to reassure a young woman whose baby had started crying and offered to bring a to-go box in case she needed a quick exit. The Lighthouse Grill wasn't perfect, it didn't need to be. It just needed heart, and Naomi ensured it kept that heartbeat steady. Halfway through the rush, a familiar voice called out from table 12. Naomi, she turned, and her face lit up. It was Mrs. Thompson, the older woman she used to serve every Thursday before everything changed. Her husband sat beside her, smiling warmly. You're a manager now, Mrs. Thompson said, clapping her hands together. We read about the promotion on the community page. Naomi laughed bashfully. Word travels fast. We told everyone, the husband said proudly. Nobody deserves it more. The compliment hit harder than she expected. It always hit hard when older folks praised her. They reminded her of her grandmother, the one who raised her, the one who told her that kindness could outlive cruelty if she held on to it long enough. Naomi promised to check on them soon, and returned to the floor, feeling like she could run another 10-hour shift without blinking. The documentary team returned later that week for follow-up shots. They wanted footage of Naomi in action, her leadership, her empathy, her presence. She wasn't thrilled about cameras, but she cooperated because she wanted the story told right. She wanted people in other restaurants, other towns, other situations to know that change wasn't impossible. At one point, a producer asked if they could interview her directly. She hesitated. I'm not as good with words as Ethan, she said. Show us anyway, the producer urged. They set up near the window where the sunset poured in warm gold across the wood tables. Naomi sat with her hands folded in her lap, the camera rolled, the room quieted. She took a steady breath. "What kept you going?" the interviewer asked, "before everything changed?" Naomi stared toward the front door for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "My son," she said softly. "I needed this job to keep him safe, but also, I kept hope that someone would eventually notice. That someone would care enough to stop it." She smiled faintly. "Turns out someone did. Even if he showed up looking like he just climbed out of a construction site." The crew laughed softly. Naomi let her shoulders relax. "I didn't help that man because I thought he was anybody important. I helped him because that's who I am. Who my father raised me to be. Kindness doesn't check price tags." "And now?" the interviewer asked. "How do you feel now?" Naomi looked toward the bustling kitchen, where Micah was doing homework in his usual booth, tapping his pencil and waving every time she glanced his way. "Now, I feel like I built something, like all of us did, a place where no one has to swallow their fear to get through a shift." She didn't cry, but her eyes shone in the way people's eyes do when their soul speaks before their voice can. On a rainy Saturday, one of the biggest emotional beats of the year arrived quietly. A man Naomi had never seen before, beard, glasses, worn cardigan, walked in holding a thick envelope. He approached the bar, asking for the manager named Naomi. When she came out, he handed her the envelope with a trembling smile. "My daughter worked here 2 years ago," he said. "She moved out of state, but she told me what happened recently. I just want to say, thank you for standing up. She was one of the people who left because of him." Naomi blinked. "I'm so sorry she went through that." "She's doing better now," he said, "and she wanted you to have this." Inside the envelope was a handwritten letter from the ex-employee thanking Naomi for being braver than she had been able to be, and inside that letter was a small folded photo of the young woman smiling in her new apartment. The father's voice cracked. "She said you gave her hope that good people can win sometimes." Naomi pressed the photo against her chest, overwhelmed by how far the impact had traveled. Ethan watched from the corner, not intruding. He'd learned by now that some moments weren't his to take space in. But when Naomi finally approached him, eyes wet and smile soft, he asked gently, "You okay?" She nodded, better than okay, and he believed her. Later that evening, during the last hour of the dinner rush, something small but powerful happened. A teenage busser accidentally dropped a tray of glasses, shattering them across the floor. In the old days, he would have been yelled at, written up, maybe even sent home in humiliation. This time, Naomi stepped in immediately. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "And no," the boy stammered, horrified. "Sakes, I'm sorry." "Good, then it's just glass." She crouched to help him pick up the pieces. The boy looked like she had just saved him from a firing squad.
People saw that. Customers saw it. Staff saw it. Ethan saw it. And it was one of the moments he'd remember for years, not because of the accident but because of the way she responded. Closing time arrived with soft music playing over the speakers and the lights dimmed to that final warm glow. Naomi finished paperwork while Micah colored at the bar. Ethan walked up with 2 cups of hot chocolate, one for her, one for the kid. "You know," he said, leaning against the counter, "my dad always believed a restaurant could change someone's life." Naomi smiled. "Seems like he was right." Ethan nodded slowly, but he never got to see it happen like this. Naomi didn't look away. "Maybe he did. Maybe you're the one catching up." Ethan let out a small laugh, touched despite himself. "Maybe." There was a quiet moment, comfortable, full of mutual understanding, not romantic, not dramatic, just 2 people who had walked through fire together and come out better for it. Micah tugged at Naomi's sleeve. "Mom, can we go home?" "Yeah, baby," she said, brushing his cheek. "Let's go." Ethan watched them gather their things, their coats, the school papers, the empty hot chocolate cup, and head toward the door. Naomi paused, turned back and said, "You did right by us, Ethan." He shook his head. "You did right by yourselves. I just finally paid attention." She smiled and stepped out into the rainy night, her son skipping beside her. Ethan stood alone in the quiet restaurant, lights low, the smell of the day's cooking lingering in the air. He looked around at the tables, the staff finishing their side work, the boards on the wall filled with handwritten notes from customers saying they felt the difference here. This was more than justice. It was restoration, it was growth. It was the return of a soul that had once been dimmed. The Lighthouse Grill wasn't perfect, but it was alive, and it was honest, and it was finally safe for the people who needed it most. And that, more than any revenue report or 5-star review, was the legacy Ethan wanted to build.